Hey, what's up, guys? What's going on, YouTube? It is Rules for Rebels back with episode 42 of Side Hustle Tuesdays. Now, as much as I wanted to save this story today for episode 420, I love this story and really wanted to get it out there, so we'll do it for episode 42. That should give you a hint as to what today's episode is going to be about. Today's story, and without further ado, let's get into this. So today is the story of a bartender who took advantage of Colorado's modern-day green rush and decided to publish a statewide marijuana guide. I'll touch on this more at the end of the episode, but if you're in a state with legal weed, there are business opportunities galore right under your nose, and I'll touch on those at the end of today's episode. So today's side hustler decided to make and publish a statewide marijuana guide, which answers commonly asked questions, reviews dispensaries, and basically just gets you up to date and up to speed on everything there is to know about the Colorado weed scene. Think of it like a TripAdvisor or a Lonely Planet for weed heads. He makes $15 per guide, and to date, he has sold over 2,000 of these. Johnny Welsh is the gentleman we'll be talking about today, and he's a bartender from Colorado. Obviously, as a bartender, you come into contact with a lot of people and interact with a lot of people. And as recreational marijuana was legalized in Colorado, he noticed a lot of the bar banter which was going on with him and his customers involved weed. Many asked questions about it as well, and this is what gave him his idea for a statewide marijuana travel guide of sorts, and he decided to call it Weedgalized in Colorado. True Tales from the High Country. Now, Johnny was no stranger to side hustles. He was a fitness instructor, he did a bit of carpentry, he bartended, and he dabbled in a lot of different things. So this wasn't his first stab at side hustling. However, it was his first stab at being a writer. Now, as I mentioned, as weed was being legalized recreationally, Johnny noticed a lot of his bar side banter was focused on weed. People shared stories, others had questions such as, are you allowed to smoke in the bar? Are you allowed to smoke on the street? Are there limits to how much you can have? Can you smoke in hotels? Etc., etc., etc. And Johnny also noticed that the recent legalization had stirred up a lot of entrepreneurial spirit in people around the area, and he decided that he would take a stab at it as well, and this is kind of what initially gave him his idea to create the guide. So Johnny decided to start by kind of getting a lay of the new weed landscape and interviewing some people. He interviewed the county sheriff to give people to kind of get an idea of how the laws were. He interviewed somebody who ran a bud and breakfast, which is basically like a bed and breakfast, but that either has or is weed friendly. He interviewed headshop owners, dispensary owners, and various people involved in the weed industry, both directly and indirectly. He wanted to write a guide almost like a TripAdvisor or a Lonely Planet. His biggest challenge was finding financing. He wound up paying for the project himself and even dipped into his retirement fund to fund it. He wound up spending over $12,000 on editors and publishing, and another $18,000 on travel expenses, CPAs, forming a business entity, and other research. That's a heck of a lot of money, so I'm not sure if other research meant he'd visited every dispensary in the country or in the state and smoked, but that's a pretty good chunk of change to get a project like this off the ground. Since he was self-publishing, he wanted to stand out from the crowd, so he wound up forming an LLC and called it Peak One Publishing. The actual printing of the book only cost about $5, and he wound up opting for a higher quality of paper, which gave the book a quality feel, and in large part is probably why he can demand a $19.99 price point per book. It feels like a high-quality book. He sells his book, again, for $19.99, and to date he's sold over 2,000 of them, and at a $5 cost per book, that leaves him with a profit of over $40,000 to date. Now keep in mind he did sink about 30 grand into this starting out, so he's recouped his initial investment and profited about $10,000 at this point. Now the great thing is that everything moving forward is going to be 100% profit since he's already covered his initial expenses. So it turns out his hunch was right. There was a demand for the product he created, and he's been rewarded handsomely for it. In addition to sales from head shops and novelty shops, he also sells a good number of these copies just to patrons at the bar from chatting with people, and he's even selling his book on Amazon.com. I'll link to his book in the description box below in case any of you guys are interested in checking it out. One funny commentary about Amazon, a little bit off topic. I'm not allowed to sell a Kush shirt, but people can sell weed guides, dab mats, vaporizers, rolling papers, and other types of weed-related stuff, but that's a discussion for another day. Thus far, Johnny has gone back to the printer 7 times for additional print runs of the book. So medical and recreational cannabis recreational cannabis has become a massive industry in states that have legalized it. Maybe someone in Colorado can confirm or clarify this, but a while back I heard a stat that people were actually getting tax refund checks. I guess from what I had heard, because of the massive amount of taxes in this booming industry, it's apparently against Colorado state constitution for the state to, I think, either take in over a certain amount of money or take in more money than they actually need. So they actually had to give some tax money back to the citizens, just to give you an idea of how big this industry really is. So if you live in a medical or recreational state, there are business opportunities galore, both profiting from weed directly as well as indirectly. We always say find a pain point or find a way to do something better than the way it's currently done. And one example of this is banking. Now, most dispensaries can't use traditional banking services as marijuana is still illegal federally and banks are FDIC insured. So many veterans and former law enforcement personnel have set up security services that do money pickups from the dispensaries since they deal in cash and have a lot of money on hand. They transport the money to a safe location to alleviate the risk of robberies, and they are paid handsomely for that. Then there's the bakers who bake edibles. There's delivery services that deliver weed to your home, kind of like an Uber Eats. If you're in a legal state and you're not capitalizing on it, slap yourself in the face right now because you have so many opportunities right in front of you. Now, I realize setting up a grow house or opening up a dispensary can be really expensive, both in terms of like building out a location, having lawyers, maybe getting any relevant licenses, etc. But there are all types of other small little businesses that you can start that don't require a lot of capital. The whole bed and breakfast or bud and breakfast, I've seen a lot of these. I was, in preparation for my trip to Colorado, I was doing a little bit of research, and a lot of these aren't even that nice. It's literally somebody who just decided to turn their house into a bed and breakfast, maybe throw up some lava lamps, and they supply weed, and all of a sudden now they're a bed and breakfast. I know years ago, even in California, back when it was only medical and not, or I guess California still isn't legalized, but there were people who did delivery services, and a lot of these things fall in like a gray area of the law. If your state is fully legal, most of these things are probably legal, but there are all types of kind of ancillary services that you can offer to support the industry. So let's say maybe you're a carpenter. You could help people build grow rooms. Maybe you kind of have a green thumb and are good at gardening. You could help, a novice or a newbie get a grow set up. There are all different types of ways that you could make money in this. Assuming everything is legal in your state, definitely check that out. One interesting thing, prior to Nevada and Las Vegas legalizing recreational cannabis, a good friend of mine formed a company which charged $150 to help tourists get a Nevada medical marijuana card so that they could enjoy some weed on their vacation and visit the dispensaries in Las Vegas. Now, this was before the state went fully legal, and it was because of their loose medical laws he was able to do this. But he set up billboards, got his car wrapped, and had a pretty booming business. And eventually, legalization, full legalization for recreational use, is actually what wound up putting him out of business. But it was good while it lasted, and he made a good amount of money. My point is, anytime a new and popular industry pops up, there are business opportunities galore and tons of ways to make money. One last thing I wanted to touch on before I leave you is just a quick comment on self-publishing, as well as how Johnny wound up going about creating his guide. So very early on in my online hustling days, I started by creating digital guides and selling ebooks, and I did it without a penny to my name and without putting any money into it. Now, you don't need tens of thousands or even hundreds of dollars to get started in self-publishing, and while it wound up working out well for Johnny, I personally think it was actually quite foolish of him how he went about doing things. You can create ebooks and digital products for free. You don't need to pay editors thousands of dollars. You can do the editing yourself, or worst case scenario, find somebody cheap on Fiverr or Upwork or Elance to do it for you. Now, if you want to publish a physical book, obviously there's a cost, unlike publishing digitally. You're going to have to pay to get the books published, but even at $5 per book, he could have got a test run printed of, say, 100 of these books, and it would have only cost him $500. So he could have tested out this idea for $500 as opposed to thinking tens of thousands of dollars into it. And an idea that's unproven, and also venturing into something like writing and publishing, which he had no experience in. I personally think it was kind of foolish to dive in as heavy as he was and think as much money into this project as he did, because it just was completely unnecessary. I do, however, think that it was smart for him to come out with a physical book as opposed to an ebook. Take a look on Amazon, and I'm sure you can find a bunch of weed books galore. Having a physical book sets you apart from the competition. In Johnny's case, it also gave him the ability to get his products sold locally at tourist shops, head shops, novelty shops, etc. And also it created a barrier to entry. Not everybody has money to start a business, and even those who do often aren't willing to risk their money. So simply the fact that he was willing to sink some money into getting physical copies of his book printed out, in my opinion, really set himself apart from others and contributed heavily to his success. Anyhow, guys, I thought this was a really fun story. It involves weed and writing, two things I really enjoy. Also, I think it's really cool about the story. What's really cool about this story is self-publishing is literally something that any of you guys can do. What's a topic that you're knowledgeable about? Think about that right now. Whatever it is, I guarantee you that somebody else out there is interested in it as well, or is maybe just getting started on whatever that subject is and would be willing to pay you to learn about it through buying your book. And I'll give you kind of a silly example, but also a relevant example before you leave. So I really like cliff diving and cliff jumping. And that said, it's hard to find locations to do this. And many people are also very secretive about their locations, right? Like little secret local spots to go jump. I spent hours online perusing forums and reading message boards and trip reports, trying to find places to jump. Even something as simple as somebody making a little ebook or guide to my area of, the top 25 places to cliff dive within 3 hours of Chicago, or even the top 100 places to cliff dive within the country. Something like that, I would probably buy it. So again, if you have knowledge to share, I guarantee you there's somebody out there who'd be willing to pay for it. Anyhow, guys, until next time, this is Rules for Rebels and Side Hustle Tuesdays, signing off.